Hi, welcome everybody. Welcome to the latest of the CTO Craft Bytes. Today we're going to be talking to Cornel Fatulescu, and you'll have to let me know if I said your name right, okay, later. If this is your first time to a CTO Craft Bytes, let me just tell you a little bit more about the group. CTO Craft is a mentoring and coaching community for technology leaders all around the world, focusing on supporting technologists and their leadership growth. Community members are currently over 7,000, and CTO Craft provides them with one-to-one coaching, mentoring groups, a curated Slack community, and events just like this one. If you're not a member of CTO Craft community and you're interested in becoming one, you like getting updates on events or in emails, then I'm going to post some links into the chat right now. Copy, paste. There you go. Okay, big thanks today to headline partner AWS for helping make these Bytes events possible. I'm Emma Hopkinson-Spark. I'm Chief of Staff at a technology consultancy called 101 Ways, and I'm joined today by Cornel, who is the Chief Platform Officer at Pentalog. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself, Cornel?
Yes, thanks for the introduction. Yeah, I'm in charge of with products and development in Group Pentalog. And Group Pentalog is offering teams, mainly in different ways, that suit customer needs. We have around 250 customers every year, and very interesting year-to-year renewal rate, more than 90%. And I'd love to share more about that. So if you want, we can connect after this episode.
Cool. I will be sharing contact details for myself and Cornel later anyway in the chat, so you'll be able to pick those up. Today is the third of a four-part series all around CTO fundamentals. Today we're going to be talking tactics. Cornel's going to run through a bit of a presentation, and if you have any questions, obviously share and share your thoughts over in the chat window over on the right-hand side. And at the bottom, you'll see a little button that says Ask a Question. So if you want to pop your questions in there, we're going to save some space at the end to pick those questions up. So if you post a question and we don't get it straight to it straight away, don't worry, we're not ignoring you. We will pick it up later. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Cornel, who can talk us through CTO tactics.
Yes. Please just confirm me that you see my screen. Up, and that you sharing my screen, it says.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Good. I'm very happy to see so many people at the third session, CTO Tactics. This is actually not the last one. There will be a fourth one where we will wrap everything together in an episode called A Better CTO. Now, for those who didn't manage to see the previous sessions, there is this character called Bob. Bob was a developer, and he became CTO, but he didn't have a definition of the role, what CTO means. So during the ideal CTO session, he's trying to discover all that. Now he manages to have a list of requirements that I'm going to recall quickly. And then he engages in strategy, and he understands what strategy means, and how to co-partner with the executive and the investors in these regards. So lots of things, very interesting things that he learned. And now he's going further through tactics. So in this session, I will take the minimal knowledge from those two episodes, but I strongly recommend you go and watch them again. Now, short guidelines to during the session, focus on the blue areas. That's the highlight of the moment in the episode. Usually it takes 35 minutes, 37 minutes. It depends on, I don't know, my pace, my emotional state. And of course, questions, write them, as Emma said, and we will look at them in the end. Now, there are some text, sometimes some bullets in the slides. And those were put there just when you download the materials and you look at them, you read them, you will find references and things which is still valuable, and that require a second run of the same materials. Now, where were we at the CTO strategy? So we finished with Bob, who had this list of requirements. In the ideal CTO, we've learned about CTO flavors, and there was the big thinker kind of CTO. There was the CTO as an infrastructure manager, as a visionary, as an operations manager, or external facing kind of CTO. You have all the references in those slides. And Bob learned a lot, and he understood that despite the flavor of the CTO, 5 things are critical, no matter what kind of implementation. And one of them was translate technology to business, and the other way around. So he practiced during the CTO strategy episode, he practiced this requirement, and he found out that the metaphor as business scaling machine can be a competitive advantage, but it's not by default competitive advantage. So very important. But that was among the learnings he had. And business scaling machine was doing the same thing at a greater scale without increasing the costs proportionally. So to say it on a very fast forward. Then he understood that there shouldn't be technology strategy, marketing strategy, functional strategy, all these sides. So that's a bad practice in strategy. He also had lots of thoughts about talent, his team. He considers talent as competitive advantage, but be very careful, because this is Bob's philosophy. This is not, if you talk with other people in strategy, they will not consider talent as a competitive advantage. The reason Bob thinks talent is competitive advantage is because in a very saturated market and in a market where from business perspective, a teenager could disrupt your business because he can do that on his own or on her own. That can be a serious competition. So he's looking at it from this perspective. But remember, this is Bob's philosophy. This is not common in the literature of strategy. Then he discovered that if technology fosters innovation, it fosters strategy. This is very important, because when it does that, the positioning of the CTO is quite different than compared with a CTO that works mainly on the operational efficiency. And depending on the scale of initiatives, that requires different kind of strategic thinking, which is not the same thing as strategy. Strategic thinking are the tools, the methods that we employ in many regards, not just in strategy. He also practiced a lot the partnership with the executive officer, and he understood that the strategy is not his accountability. It's the chief executive officer accountability towards the shareholders. And of course, the CTO plays an important role there. And we developed that a lot in the CTO strategy, but it's not his accountability. So he's not accountable for the strategy, and he's not accountable, that doesn't exist a technology strategy. There's only one strategy. He understood things like strategy is not a popularity context, so be careful for the executive committees. He's also saying that the strategy shouldn't make everyone happy, and it requires the reconfiguration of the value stream, so of the value chain. So if you are building a new branch in the chain, that's more innovative, so it requires some specific positioning from the CTO. If it's just doing it faster or better in terms of, cheaper, that's operational efficiency, and the CTO will position very differently. And tactics are very operations efficiency in a sense. We will see that soon. He also found that it's very hard to find balance between competition and co-creation, and how to tackle with that. And very, very important strategy is emerging, it's continuous, it's tested every day. So it's not a fixed concept. We go further from there. What are the skills in terms of, remember we've used the Dreyfus skills acquisition model. It's a tool, you find it on Wikipedia. So we reuse it here. And in the CTO strategy, Bob only practiced the co-partnership with the executive officer, and he's still an advanced beginner a lot. And he kind of developed a more strategic thinking, positioning. So this is what he did already. Now let's go into the tactics. So a very important concept. What's tactics or what's not strategy in a sense? So strategy was positioning towards a given direction, but the direction was what makes us unique. So there are these uniqueness options and that define our direction. And then we say strategic positioning, but strategy is not steps. Even it's more like decisions that we take for those positioning. And of course, there is some sort of ordering in this positioning. When we say we do this kind of features for these users, or we do this country, or we will have this capacity of 24/7 support, or that we will shift to an industry, that's part of strategy. This kind of decisions is not, I will build a mobile app. That's not strategy. And also what we don't do. We can look at the same thing from the other perspective. Very important. In strategy, if you don't say what you don't do, you might do it poorly. So you should see it as a set of decisions. And they are having an order because you can't work and implement all the decisions in the same time. But if that's strategy, what is tactics? So we know that strategy is not operational effectiveness. So doing faster or cheaper, that's not strategy. It's not about best practice. So if you say I'm doing immutable infrastructure, I'm doing Scrum, that's not strategy. And it's not about goals. Remember, it's not about the steps you are conducting towards that decision. Now, also a very important aspect of the strategy is there is not such thing as go-to-market strategy. We call it a strategy, but that's not a strategy. That's part of tactics usually. Often we employ the term of technology strategy, but it's not. It's part of tactics. So you will find that again a bit later. So it's not about the timeline also, and not about long-term or short-term. You can have short-term strategy. You can have long-term tactics. But very important, tactics are touchable, actionable. Strategy is abstract. So roadmap is tactics because it's a very precise set of steps that we are going to have. Marketing strategy is tactics. UX is also part of the tactics. So if we look at the strategy again and the positioning we have, so we have a uniqueness option, we have a set of decisions, and we say to implement those decisions, we need some sort of steps. And then we go into tactics. So, and we have with here highlighted with the green, these are steps in tactics. And then we have two things: steps that didn't work, so tactics that didn't work, and the tactics we don't want to engage with because we learned from literature, from others, that we shouldn't try them. That's already obvious. Bismarck said, only fools try everything. Everyone else, learn from the others. So it looks something like this. So lots of things that we will not do. The orange stuff, the green stuff is things that we did and they worked, and the green stuff here as a metaphor are things that we tried but they didn't work in tactics. And then we have, because there are different decisions in the strategy, we have this kind of working in parallel. And if we look at okay, let's put a timeline there, and then we get hey, we can build a roadmap. And so we have all these decisions all together. In a sense, we try to increment on all of them, and we can regroup that into roadmaps per year. So just to go through the conceptual aspects of it. And now we return to Bob. Bob, who goes to the coach and said, I'm going to work on my roadmap. Of course, immediately says that there's a difference between what you said you learned and what you're doing. Are you sure that is your roadmap? You're right. There shouldn't be my roadmap. There should be a company roadmap. So this is kind of very catchy because if you look at the industry, we see very often that the fashion of having a chief product and the chief technology and chief, everyone with their teams, and they kind of end all of them having their own roadmaps, and there's the department trap. So they work in silos in the end. So be careful about that. That's a trap. So it's very hard to put everyone together. So we also believe that maybe the C part, the chief technology, chief marketing, whatever, should also have from the C something like collective, because it's one strategy, it's one roadmap. Then because there is one roadmap, you can't really fit everything with ease in one roadmap. There are things which are more like incubation. There are things more like productivity centric, more like performance. And there is a very interesting body of knowledge called zone management that can help there. And you can say it proposes something like, but of course, if you are a startup, you are in incubation. That's it. Don't mind about zone to win. But if you are not there anymore, you have things in productivity, performance, and transformation. And you have an horizon there, and you can play with it so that you ensure that initiatives don't eat each other. Now, just to recall you, write your questions. We are diving into many things that I'm not going to talk a lot about them. So I'm going to say about 0.0001 things of those body of knowledges that I'm going to share here. And there are different ways of addressing these problems of roadmap and the way we conduct in tactics. One of very interesting and very popular is the management innovation. Now, when Bob reads this, the first thing he says is, this doesn't come from my world. Bob, his background is in Agile. He has experience in engineering, Agile engineering. He reads this and says, why? In 2007, I think that's the year when it appeared, this book, someone is writing a book like this, because everything around Agile was about management innovation in a sense. What happened? So one thing that he learns from here is that there are, even if everyone is using technology doesn't mean the same thing. And culturally speaking, we engage very differently with technology. This is why new body of knowledge emerge every day, new books, and they kind of take again all the things that we've learned already. So that was very interesting. For example, in digitizations, there is a digitization, what we call industry, which is still technology. Those people might find the Gary Hamel works very interesting, while those who are in product development, they might find the engineering practices and DevOps and all the holacracy stuff much more relevant. But they all talked about the same thing. Because when he goes back to holacracy, he says, look, governance was defined there as efficiency management. Remember, governance is also policies, ESG, and all this stuff. But in these episodes, Bob is watching governance from the efficiency management perspective. Roles efficiency, decisions backlog. So the idea here is we take decisions at all layers and we say, how efficient is that? My role as a CTO, how efficient is that implemented in the company? My role as the chief marketing officer. We are taking all decisions. How efficient are those decisions taken? So these are the key questions Bob is asking. If we are asking to limit work in progress for teams at backlog level, why shouldn't we ask to limit the decisions things that should land in the backlogs of others at the highest levels of the company? We should limit work there also. So these are the key questions Bob is asking. And he's looking and saying, from strategy to teams, there are at least 5 levels. And one of the first things that he feels about is nobody is facilitating the work between the lowest levels and the upper levels. We say Scrum Master is important. He's facilitating a lot of work. She brought value to the teams and delivery capacity. Why shouldn't we have someone who facilitates this work at the highest levels? And then he looks at the way to engage with it. Says, I've learned so much. I'm going to go to the executive management and make a show. So this is how things will turn out. This is how we should do it. And the coach says, that sounds very hero. Are you willing to save the company? How much of this is your skin in the game? And how much of this will work if it's you fighting for it? If it's not your executive officer fighting for it, for example, why is it important? So he takes this and goes to the executive officer and says, look, I feel governance, a thing that we don't discuss, should be your responsibility as executive officer, at least to say someone needs to do it. And we need a definition of that. And they defined, they have a definition here. And they say, we should have global governance, and we should look at processes and roadmaps and how efficient we are executing this. Yes, it's not your responsibility, dear CTO. I'll take that on my plate, and I say we engage collectively in it, so everyone contributes on that. But remember, many companies engage differently in governance. They have chief governor officer, or they have, so this is the way they implement it in their company. Now, Bob is happy with that because having a place where we say how many decisions we've taken, were they implemented, did they ever arrive to the team, and we already have expectations. So having a place like that, it's important. Now he says that seems done, but it will take time for us. What can I do myself? So strategy is not myself. There are lots of things I cannot do. I need to do collectively with the executive management. I should also do something myself. What's that? And there is the CTO direct management. So there are things decided by the CTO that have their own cycle time, and Bob needs to be conscious about how much of that he's going to do. Therefore, he says, I'm going to make a decision-making framework, and I will apply it for myself. In the decision-making framework, first I'll take something very personal and do some sort of guidelines of how am I going to respond instead of reacting. If someone is mean with me, how am I going to respond to that? So that's a very private. I'm not going to share that. And then he goes to things that these are for me and the team. For example, I will define what is safe for the team to do and what's not safe so that they can take decisions. So it's his decision framework. I will define things like it seems we are not doing more than 10 initiatives per month, quarter, sprint. Let's not do more than that. So it's a decision, and he can take that decision. Then he remembers what he had previously in other episodes from Count of Nassau, Morris, agility in practice in the a very special moment in history. This was considered the first modern battle in history, but Morris was an agile thinker. He enforced discipline. He said army needs to be motivated, fed. It was very different from the Spanish. He needs to look at the work from a holistic perspective. He needs to standardize. He needs to reward talent, not corruption, not the aristocrats. Go more to meritocracy. So Bob is not taking this from the frameworks from agile thinking. He's taking this from Morris. He's putting all this in the way he's going to take decisions and the philosophy as his team. He's looking also, again, at various works, like from Gary, and he says, because whatever he does needs to also fit with the mentality from the highly engineering teams and also from the kind of those who struggle to digitize. And he says there is something, a balance to find between bureaucracy and humanocracy. Now, humanocracy is something very, very new that tries to solve some problems that Bob doesn't have immediately. But he still finds this knowledge very helpful. And he says, bureaucracy is needed because when you scale, when you have a team and you pass to 2 teams or 3 teams, you need to be more descriptive. Not even the best agilists that were originating the movement, they said empirical works at small scale. That those were the limits of agility. And when we worked on the large scale Scrum or large scale Agile, we said becoming more descriptive is important. So that's bureaucracy in a sense. So to shift work from a team to another, to ensure we have an optimal value stream, someone needs to suffer for the greater good. So, and we put a queue and things like this. But he takes this and says, there is something very interesting in Gary's work: passion, innovation, all these parts. Bob, he comes from the agile thinking. He saw that a lot, and he says, that's impossible. I don't have a problem with people not being able of imagining stuff, not being able of creating stuff. My problem is I have too many ideas on the plate. I don't have capacity to deliver even 2% of those ideas. So there is a conflict there, and says we shouldn't be in an extreme, and we should say, I don't have the means. I'm playing in this league. I have 5 people in my team, 10 people, 20 people. How much of new ideas can I absorb? So if we are getting 20 ideas every day, that's not going to work. So he needs a framework of what's new ideas. And he says, I'm going to limit the number of ideas. And that will be the bureaucratic stuff up front to ensure there is a process. And we discourage new ideas because we cannot deliver all of them. This is Bob's choice, because depending on the company and things like this, that might differ. But this is very important. This is key, because he cannot, he says it needs to be reasonable. So limiting the number of decisions is important. Limiting the number of things new is important. What changes is maybe it's important to, instead of bringing new ideas, optimizing what's existing. So he says, let's optimize what we have, because in the context of new ideas, we don't go with these features to the users as we should. There is an optimization there with users to be done. And then he said, to have my decisional framework okay, because I don't want to decide everything in tactics. I have my engineering managers. I have my teams. I want to give them autonomy. I want to ensure that when they take decisions, they don't harm the company. They don't do something which is out of the strategy. Even if that's great, that's not the strategy. That will harm it in a sense. So maybe we should debate if something should be thrown away, but we should keep consistency from strategy to the lowest levels. There is a very interesting thought from the movie makers who were asked how much of their movies, the end product, was what they were originally thinking about it. And in the best case scenario, they say 30% of the end product is what they achieve, because there are lots of things that you decide, but as everyone contributes to it, it takes a very different flavor and look and feel. So he's going to say, I'm going to have team pillars. Now, team pillars is small educational pills. Like, I'm going to define them and say, this is wrong, this is I discourage, this is I encourage. An example of that. Data sensitivity. How can people decide, developers or architects, if they don't know how to treat data? Who defines how data should be treated, should be processed? There needs to be some guidelines. So I will say, in the company, we have 6 levels of data sensitivity. And we have public, things that can be public, things that are secrets. And we ask questions. Can we cache that? Can we store this in files? Can we share this externally? Can we share this with partners? Can we have this in a relational database? Should we encrypt it? Should we whatever? Keep it in a different storage? So he's building this and says, I'm not going to ask too much. You take the decisions as you want, but take into account this. Not respecting this will harm the company, because all the decisions are based on this. Those who don't have data sensitivity among us, not Bob, this is me saying, those who don't have this kind of criteria are going to have important challenges during the due diligence if they go into details and see that you can't tell precisely what data is treated according to what. So this is very important. There's no architecture, modern architecture today, without having this kind of, we know what's wrong and what's not wrong. And then he engages in responsibility. He feels like many people in his team don't engage with quality and different practices as he would like to. he does a workshop and he's doing this and says, let's do test-driven development. Everyone is happy and say, can you help us explain to the product owner that we need test-driven development? And Bob is saying, I've asked you previously, who's responsible with the quality of the code? You said you. And now you're asking me to convince the product owner that this is valuable. Are you sure you are responsible? Because you are externalizing the responsibility to the product owners when you ask that. If you are responsible, you are not going to do it differently because you are responsible. So, and there is a framework of a very interesting framework from Christopher Avery about responsibility process, and he's teaching the team around that. And then he goes to, okay, pillars. I will have 4 at the start. I'll build more then, but I will also ask the team to define these pillars. What are the things that can harm the company? We engage in some sort of philosophical movement so that we become better together. It's not no purpose in me defining everything. Everyone needs to understand them. And then he says from value drivers like a bid up, even business scaling machine, because we defined that that was evaluated for the company in need. And strategy, roadmap, goals like OKRs, and the team. There are all these layers. And he's looking from a repeatability perspective and empowering teams. So he's going to have more pillars, and he's going to have something that is called a repeatability day. Like Maurice was repeating. Maneuvering in teams, that was very hard. And this is very hard in many companies. When we need to change something, one is taking a delay, everyone is taking. How do we shift all that? How do we I don't know, replan, realign, recalibrate? That's very hard. So he's doing something in these regards so that they practice the hardest things that they cannot repeat. Because he is willing to have an organization which is not just robust, but resilient. And then he looks at a practice and says, we are going to use only standard tools and methods proven that work. We need to have real good reasons to do otherwise. And he's taking this bridge metaphor and saying, parents say, I'm leaving my kids on the bridge. I ensure they don't fall from the bridge, but I let them go however they want in that bridge. Scrum framework is the same. So you ensure you have the bridge and the risk is mitigated, so but they can do whatever they can do there. And now if you put also the pillars, usually the risk of doing something very wrong is diminished. And then he's going to measure the cycle time from the inception of the decision in the when it emerged in the roadmap until we get benefits. So that's very important. That's efficiency management at the highest levels. Now, he's taking all this again and says repeatability seems to be a very interesting aspect for us. So Scrum enables repeatability and standardization. We will do repeatability workshops. We'll have these pillars. We'll have frameworks and standards that enable us to do again. That's also very important in resilience. We can't repeat in IT. And IT is a very interesting industry because you can't tell what's best practice. If you go to any industry, best practice is doing by everyone. This is why we call it best practice. So at Pentalog, for example, this is a screenshot. We are using libraries of practices so that we can say, if we're doing this, you're in starter. It guides us, it gives structure. So, and you can also say, and maybe better say what you are not getting because you're not doing those. And one last thing among the last things that, so total cost of ownership. There are some articles that I already published on CTO Craft. I will not go through them, but CTOs had this weak spot, blind spot. CTOs were product-centric, outward-looking. Chief information officer were looking in the inward in the company from enterprise architecture perspective, at cost and all this. And they can't answer to total cost of ownership. And usually you have either a CTO or either a chief information officer. But when you have a due diligence evaluation of a company, everything counts. And we don't need 2 architectures, Nigel. So most of the CTOs find themselves with 2 architectures and with costs out of control when we count that. So that's a very interesting aspect. The CTOs should not lose. This is another example of pillar how to choose from technology perspective to gain more speed or flexibility. And Bob says, for us, is from container as a service, because we want speed, not flexibility. Now, wrapping all this together, what did Bob learn in tactics? So Bob learned that CTOs contribute to governance, but governance is not their accountability. CTOs can enable governance. Many different companies are doing in different ways. And in the absence of a chief governor, the accountability is the executive officer. Repeatability is important. If you can't repeat, you're thinking short term. You are not leaving too much behind. Very important. And we need to think of how can these organizations thrive after we left. Maturity models are a way, they are criticized, and there will be an article explaining why maturity models are better than not having models, and they're doing everything in a creative discovery mode. But there's also an extreme of making them too bureaucratic and not evolving enough. And CTO ensures tactics are efficient. There is a framework of tactics, but not necessarily doing the tactics. He delegates. The way the teams engage with tactics is more important. So he's defining the framework of working around. It's like the commanders had officers in charge on different ways. Then he looked at facilitate work and enhance agility, and he learned a lot. That management innovation might be CTO responsibility. Okay, why not? But usually it isn't. Global roadmap is important, much more than local roadmap. We can have filters, but we discourage this because we might find ourselves working on things which aren't important for the strategy or the highest levels. And if fitting too much in a roadmap is difficult, then we can have zones and filter the roadmap by zones and look at it so that we judge the value of initiatives in a different perspective. Repeatability is an organizational must. Those who want resilient organizations, they need to think repeatability. How can we repeat? Limit decision making. We ask our poor fellows down there doing value, focus, and things like this, but at the highest levels, we don't. So our job is to ask as much questions as we can, because one decision we take, it's lots of costs committed by the company. So we should filter as much as possible, because we need, when we know in what league we play, we are 15 people or 2,000 people, we limit differently. Goals, roadmaps, operations, efficiency, best practices are a matter of tactics, all of them. So you can delegate to engineer managers, to VP of engineers, to the teams, but then there needs to be the framework to handle this right. And total cost of ownership is critical for the CTO. Not knowing to answer how much, an estimate, 3 years from now on, it will be like this. We increase to 20%, or we try to keep it below this. Not being able of doing that, we are failing as technology leaders. It's very, very important. And then Bob practiced many aspects of the Dreyfus skills acquisition model. In a sense, he's looking more at the VP of engineering, CTO team kind of stuff, because if working in tactics, he also says this is delegated to someone or not. He's looking from the enterprise from a 360% perspective, and through inviting others and defining pillars, it's a way of also for him to learn about what can harm and he wasn't aware. He's facilitating governance at many levels, but he's not accountable for that. But he's improving on this, and he's contributing on a lot. He's an important actor of enabling governance, because if not, he's a detractor. So governance doesn't exist if the CTO is not involved. And he's working a lot through his soft skills, because when he says I build a pillar, that's an educational thing. It's shared knowledge. You need to be aware that people will interpret differently, and you need to be there and work again and again, and frustration is the last thing that can help you. So Bob also developed something different that is not part of this year, which is called programmable company. And that goes lots into technology, architecture stuff. And that's required. CTOs need some guidance there so that they don't repeat. Remember Bismarck, Only fools repeat mistakes of others. There's so much content, so much things that we've learned that's not good, and we are still doing it. I met a company that developed for 6 months a product, and they hard-coded users in the database. That's not from our age. Using in identity and access management shouldn't be something that we decide. We should ask more like, is there any reason we shouldn't? So there are many weak spots, and of course it's criticizable what I'm saying here. But business is losing. Nobody knows what we are doing. When we have a 0-day vulnerability on satellites, I can't expect the president of NASA knowing what that means. There was a technology staff there that missed this opportunity of. So we need to be responsible. We need to engage more with best practices, standardize and reuse what others say is smart. If not, what will happen? GDPR. The only industry without a safety belt. We were harming our users in the way we were engaging with data. And we will get more and more regulation if we don't do our job well. And it's a privilege for us to correct all this. So this is very important for us, to look at all these aspects and ensure that we are doing things that don't harm the organization, and we are more assertive when we take decisions. Yeah, and this is CTO Tactics. We are going to have the last episode, a better CTO. I think it's in a month, Emma, if I remember correctly.
7th of October, yes.
That's the, we'll wrap everything together, ideal, strategy, tactics, and we'll also go to the personal level of how to implement all this at a CTO level. And I hope you will be there to ask questions and engage on that. And yeah, I'd love to hear your questions.
Cool. There are a couple of questions I can see in the chat and in the question section. By all means, if you've been writing them down, and I know I have, I've been scribbling away, then pop them in now and we shall go through. We've got about 15 minutes left where we can run through some questions. There's one here that says, I think it was Mark, lost connectivity for a while while we were just running through that. One aspect I consider is removing or reducing bottlenecks across the entire end-to-end value chain through the business. From first idea or customer touch point to delivery and support, rather than just inside the tech department. I think you mentioned it, says, or it was implied, but missed the detail on that. Can you just summarize briefly what how you sum that up?
So it's reducing bottlenecks across the entire value chain through the business. Yeah, so in the agile philosophy, there was something that said there are two different systems: pulling system and pushing system. In a pushing system, you have a team building feature, things like that, and push it to the others. And traditionally, they were pushing to QAs, the silo, and the QAs had limited capacity, and they pushed it further to, I don't know, sales, and sales pushed it further to customers, and so forth. And the idea that was a bit revolutionary there was why building stuff that might saturate others. Let's let others pull in the system, and users should pull, customers should pull based on the time they have to integrate these benefits. So it changes everything. In a sense, a user of a product might not have time to digest the news, the features. If that's the case, you are doing much more than the user can. So the idea is how these people who are pulling can connect in a value stream, and everyone is pulling, and everyone is delivering because it's requested, and it's because there's something very valuable from the start. And there's the balance there. Now, when we define as executive officers or CTOs things like we take decisions and we say this needs to be done, That's a pushing system. There needs to be balance between the two, pulling and pushing. But usually what we define here, and pushing through the value stream, is very expensive. It consumes the energy of all the teams. And the idea is we should limit how much can we push to the system, our decision making, and take into account even further the entire value stream, not just our company. But now I'm talking only about what happens in a company, the step or several steps in a stream. Because everyone else in that stream has limited capacity. So that's the first thing. Let's limit that. And of course, if you do that, it would be a pity not to measure the cycle time. So you've taken this decision, it will go through the value stream, they benefits, they confirm it. That's the cycle time. And then when you say, well, when I take a decision and I'm building a value stream map, and when I deliver, they get benefits, it takes 6 months, 1 year. It sounds crazy, but in average, even the best product companies are somewhere there. I remember a workshop that I've done several months ago, and there were the key roles in a product company, and they were looking at the 5 most important initiatives they had and the cycle time they had. None of these initiatives was delivered, and it was 9 months already. None of them was filled fully. It was easy for the executive officer to say, if we would have chosen only the first one, at least it was delivered. Mm-hmm. At least someone got value from what we did. We just don't burn our energy. So I think this is very important. I don't know if that was the question of Mark.
I think, yeah, it's definitely part of it. I found that really interesting, actually. You're talking about limiting the decisions that you make, and it's definitely something I'd like to see more on as well. But it's balancing that with something that you said around making the choices about creativity or limiting the creativity, which is a really scary concept for some people. Like, we don't want to actually admit that we're going to curtail the creativity of our teams. How do you balance that then? How do you pitch that message? Because I wouldn't like to be the one that stands up in front of my teams and say, no, don't be so creative. You don't get to make decisions. That doesn't feel right, does it?
Yeah, and you are right with asking this question, because we can pull a very long wire and go to philosophy and liberty and all that, and everything is linked. So I will just focus on this here. Every company has a context and some energy it can burn. In a sense, our responsibility is how can we get something more efficient from what we burn? It's our time, financial energy and things like this. And there are 3 levels of efficiency. First one is you look at resources and you say, I'm taking someone who's expensive, a person in the team, I replace him with someone cheaper. You can say, I'm more efficient. That's criticizable. Then you can say, I'm going to deliver faster. So I'm looking at the cycle time. I see it at the river. You have all these stones, and there's Scrum Master pulling the stones, removing impediments from the flow of the delivery. So that's the second level. The third level is, in fact, instead of always doing this that brings this amount of value, I should remove this kind of stuff with something else. So that's the part where you need creativity and say, with what I'm going to replace this value stream. So this is where new ideas come into play. Now, the challenge here is that some companies can't afford doing a change here. Because they just can't. They need another formula. They need to find build another company or something. So that's it. I've seen companies unable to do that. If they allow new ideas coming in at this level, they will just get frustrated because they will be less and less efficient. There are different levels of creativity. When you solve a technical problem, it's still creativity. So it's not like you are saying no one is creative. It's like, don't touch this area because it will harm the company. We don't have the means of doing also this and also that. And it blends into strategy and say, this is what we don't do. Strategy is also about what we don't do. We don't do this kind of features. Sorry, I'd love to, but we don't. And there is also an extreme there and especially in products development, I love the IKEA metaphor that says, you go to IKEA and say, I don't like the furniture, there's no luxury here. They will not change tomorrow for you. Their strategy is not that kind of customers. They have other kind of customers. And the strategy is all about what makes you unique, not what makes you as everyone else. Maybe building a partnership with someone would be more interesting. Being reasonable is important. I ask my chief executive officer to be reasonable in regards to what he can expect from me and my team. I should also be reasonable from what I can expect from them. If a developer comes and says, I want you to build this new business here, it's very interesting. Okay, there is a pipeline to those ideas, some limited budget to do that and wait, and it might not be for us. And if it's not the case, feel free, go and talk with others, and I'm sorry, but we cannot do it. But this is first, because if I got all my ideas and I share them with you and I ask you to do everything, it will be a mess. So my responsibility is to filter as much as I can from theory, from what others did, from other companies, for people like you here in the CTO Craft, things that you've tried, learned, and not apply them because they didn't work or they will not work in my context. That's my duty. So the duty of a developer also in the same time, or a product owner, is also to filter as much, because some stuff is not reasonable. But it's scary because we are used in the late years to talk more about liberty, about creativity, about what we are killing creativity. And it's an important concern. We should concern about it. But we should also look from a methodical perspective. What's reasonable for us? Because if I'm going to cross the road anyway, I'm saying I'm creative, I'm free to do whatever I want, and there's a car accident, that's a problem. And so we live in society, and we are condemned in society to have structures and rules. And autonomy is at the lowest levels. There we should feel free. If we are not free in this community, in this team, we should go to another community where we are more like us.
So
but the community should not do everything.
So as the leader and as the CTO in the organization, you're there to really to give that structure and to put those boundaries, but it's not dampening creativity, it's focusing it, I guess, and harnessing it for better. How much variation do you think, how much does it matter about the size of the organization? Some of the stuff that you've talked about today, and remind people you will be able to watch it back, because there was a lot of detail in the presentation. There was a lot of it seems. We talked about governance, we talked about the rules, and we talked about how you organize decision making. There are a lot of people I know in CTO Craft community that are developer number one in a small organization and are on that journey to being a CTO, versus a CTO with thousands of people and international structures and loads of teams and people to delegate to. Is the principle the same regardless of the size? And I realize that's a big question for the last 5 minutes that we have, but how much does it vary on the size of the organization, do you think?
The answer is yes, but the way you engage with these principles is different. For example, the data sensitivity pillar, the need of pillars. If you are alone, the only developer in the team, and you are with your partner, co-partner, co-investor, which is also the executive officer, and you are at that step, you don't even have a business model, you are looking for your business model, we could say that doing that is not interesting because you have it in your head. But once you have the second person, then you need to find a way to teach that person what can harm the organization. It's easy as that. Now, how many pillars, how many, it depends. Now, the data sensitivity pillar, I find it interesting that even those who are alone as the only developer in their company, they don't take this in mind. What they are doing they are not building a company which is complying already to most of the regulations in the world today. So they are harming the organization without knowing. Just having 5 minutes and say, this is my checklist, I will keep it. If I forget it, I will get back to this document. It can help. So you see, they are all important. Efficiency management. If you are 2-person and you say, we don't have money, is that the place where you need to engage with all the ideas in the world? No. Of course, it depends. If you didn't find your market, a poorly met need in a reachable market, well, ideas are welcomed, but you have nothing there. So if you are called CTO, okay, why not? Why not? But you don't have a business, you don't have anything. But once you have something, you need to keep in the back of your mind that all this is important, and say, we said we are reaching this market, we are seeing this is the problem we try to fix, and this is the way we engage with it. There's no point in talking about the second market until we didn't do at least 2 months here to test that we can build a feature useful. Make sense? So in a sense, limiting decisions is out of the box. It should be there. Now measuring the cycle time if you are only the two. But once you get there with 2, 3, 4 people, all these go into broader level of details. And usually the trap here is not knowing when to change.
Yeah.
Not knowing when to do more, because the people will do what we do. They will repeat. If we discourage efficiency, the message is efficiency doesn't matter. Quantity matters. So if an executive officer doesn't talk about efficiency and not making proof he's doing it, she's doing it, the other ones will do the same thing. It's easy as that. So there are many things that could be said here. They matter less if you don't have a business model. So if you're a startup, you can say, I don't do this yet, or I do it informally, and that's fine. But once you have some features and some users that stick around, not making, if you are having an audit and they will look at things, they will see lots of symptoms that can be rooted to this. And this is very important.
And it's much easier to deal with when you are small and to think about it as you're growing, rather than get to a size and go, we really should have done something about that, or then try and fix it, I guess is the point. We are just about out of time. I am just going to post over in the chat window now contact details for Cornel and myself, and details of the next CTO Craft Bytes event, which is plotting around interim CTOs. My dog can see a cat in the garden. She's done so well this whole time. Now I've got treats. Don't worry, I can keep her distracted. The next part in this series, so the fourth and final part in the series with Cornel, is on the 7th of October. Details will be out about that one soon. Also in the chat, I've posted the links to the previous 2 sessions on YouTube. And yeah, connect with Cornel and myself. And any final thoughts, Cornel? If people want to know more, where else could they go and read more?
So first, thank you for listening. I hope you will join the Better CTO, and there's lots of things that are very interesting and how they work together. And please don't forget, we need a new philosophy to engage with. We need to stay responsible and accountable for the technology, and engaging methodically in what we do is very important. And we have the privilege of doing that. That's my take.
Excellent, thank you. So actually, good news or exciting news for the next CTO Craft Bytes event that's happening is that it's in person in London on the Thursday, the 8th of September at 6 o'clock, and that's BST time. The event is on plotting the interim CTO path, and we'll be joined by Mary Williams, experienced CTO and Ned, Alfonso Fernandez, fractional CTO and co-founder of Eurigo, and Dave Mackey, Director and Interim of Interim at Albany Partners. So look forward to seeing everybody there. There is a link, I say, in the chat window to go and register for it. And the recording for today's event will be available on Crowdcast and YouTube later. Thanks very much, Cornel. I will sign off there and end the broadcast. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.